Art Spiegelman, I wanted to ask you the one of the 10-0 voters at the McKinn County School Board. One of those school board members said of your book, "quote It shows people hanging. It shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It's not wise or healthy."
With Art Spiegelman's graphic novel MAUS, now back in the news since it was banned by a Tennessee school board for bad language and nudity, I thought it was important that people understand briefly exactly why there is now such an uproar and why educated individuals, among them Holocaust scholars of note, are so opposed to such arbitrary, capricious, and frankly imbecilic censorship. I wanted to explain what MAUS is exactly and why it matters so much and why banning this brilliant work for bad language, the use of the now quaint word damn, and nudity, though apparently just one single panel, a tiny frame depicting his mother's suicide, is both unwise, sets a very bad precedent, and misses the point so profoundly that it raises concerns about this school board's fitness to decide such matters for their community. To me, seeing nudity here, in this drawing, is a misrepresentation, call it a misreading, of Spiegelman's larger intent, and a demonstration of a mind-boggling lack of imagination. This panel connotes tragedy. If all you can see is nudity, it's sad, but it also says a lot about this particular school board in Tennessee, where adults are too distracted by picayune concerns. What they fail to understand, as people reputedly interested in education, is that something difficult, like reading MAUS and feeling something profound afterward, is itself an important educational experience, perhaps the first for many young students. In any event, MAUS is about Art Spiegelman's actual family, specifically his attempt to get at the full story of what happened to his father during the war. MAUS is the Spiegelman family history in a way, though depicted in cartoon storyboards. So the story is personal, of course, but it is important precisely because it is also a universal story. Millions of other people were traumatized in the same manner and either perished in the camps and ghettos of Europe or else lived and came back to tell us the stories of what had been done to them, of the terrible sadism and cruelty of the Nazis and their collaborator enablers throughout Europe. MAUS is Spiegelman's very personal attempt to reconcile himself to the fact that both his parents were survivors. No one can really wrap their mind around the suffering of 1 million people, but we can understand the suffering of one. This is the basis of MAUS, and frankly, the very idea of Holocaust testimony. A man or woman who somehow survived the concentrationary universe may try afterward to relate their experiences to us. We can't really grasp it, of course, but it is our duty to listen to such stories if survivors are willing to share what happened to them with us. We try to experience what they went through, their feelings of loneliness, dislocation, bitterness, frustration, impotence, rage, terror, and profound sadness. We have all of this, and much more, in MAUS. On a recent PBS program, Spiegelman explained the genesis of his curiosity about the Holocaust.
My father and mother didn't talk that much about this in a way that I could understand when I was growing up. My father just didn't want to talk about it at all, saying people don't want to hear such stories. And he was just building himself as best he could a life in America.
We hear this story a lot, that no one here wanted to hear about the Holocaust, and this was almost certainly true in the immediate aftermath of the war. But what about later? Like so many things, it was impossible to predict the sea change regarding the Holocaust that would occur in the 1980s. People really were interested, and it's hard not to notice that the banning of MAUS in 2022 has once again turned this graphic novel back into a bestseller once again. There has always been a question about where and how the second generation of Holocaust survivors, their children, fit into Holocaust remembrance. After all, they weren't there. I think Spiegelman answers this in his own unique way. In many ways, MAUS is the ultimate cooperative effort, a dad's words enhanced by his son's drawings. In the end, the first and second generation worked together to flesh out one particular experience of the Holocaust in Poland. Now, they clearly see things a lot differently in Tennessee. There's that odd question asked by the school board member that I keep coming back to.
One school board member commenting on the book saying, quote, "It shows people hanging, it shows them killing kids. Why does the educational system promote this kind of stuff? It is not wise or healthy being in the schools. Educators and stuff, we don't need to enable or somewhat promote this stuff."
In some ways, this is precisely the point. Mass murder should disturb people. People should be moved when they think of what happened in Europe. The Tennessee School Board, by condemning this disturbing imagery, displays a misguided sense of right and wrong, Of course, material about the Holocaust is disturbing. How in the world could it be otherwise? This is truly a staggering statement. It strikes me that living in abject ignorance of history is neither wise nor healthy either. These events are depicted by Spiegelman precisely because that is what the Nazis did as their armies moved about in Europe. It is what occurred, and it is not gratuitous. The Holocaust is a horrific historical event and troubling, but it is important that people know from an early age the horrific deeds of which other humans are capable. It's a failsafe. Kids should be shocked to learn this occurred. It didn't occur 10,000 years ago. A handful of survivors are still alive at this moment. Children probably should know the results of authoritarian government and fascism and prejudice and discrimination and stereotyping of other people. It is important to educate earlier than later here. It is an insurance policy against the worst abuses. And yes, it could happen here if people forget entirely about the evils of fascism and the real results of allowing stereotypes and prejudice and, yes, book banning and all the rest to run rampant. It's important to understand what the Nazis were, how they seized and held power, and what they did to the lives of those who somehow survived the period of time in which Hitler and his ilk were dominating and decimating and devastating the European continent and European Jewry in particular. MAUS would be a hard story to tell if it wasn't in the genre of a graphic novel. The drawings are incredibly effective at illustrating the extreme disparity between the large cats and the tiny, helpless mice. Somehow the juxtaposition of animals allows us to reconsider human history. Animals, of course, have no conscience, whereas humans do, and yet animals do not perpetrate genocide against their own kind. Spiegelman's TV appearances have also raised a few other issues that are important.
We're showing the images you drew of a branch of the Spiegelman family tree in 1939 at the start of World War II. And then the second image shows the same family tree at the end of World War II, with almost all of the names now missing.
The family tree kind of tells you everything you need to know. How many of those individuals, his older brother too, how many of them might have made a difference in Art Spiegelman's life? In another interview with CNN, Spiegelman raises one last point that may be harder for younger people to understand.
Quite a while back now, it was kind of a given that the Holocaust wasn't a subject. You know, like I started school in about 52 or 53 in kindergarten, but it just wasn't a subject.
This is certainly true in my experience, and I am considerably younger than Spiegelman. In my high school, there was but half a page of one textbook that mentioned the Holocaust in passing. No one thought it worthy of note or study. Then something changed radically, and people began to want to know more. Spiegelman was part of this trend of teaching others about the destruction of European Jewry, in his case, through the story of his own family. Thanks for watching. It really means a lot. I will update again soon.
I just asked my father more about what happened, and it led to me being glued to hearing his story. It's one of the first times he and I could sit in a room together and not get into an argument. And